That it's really important for us to expand westward because we want to build railroads and we want to expand the Pacific borders. So all of a sudden these Native Americans or Indians that we have moved west of the Mississippi are in our way again, okay? And we just continue to push and push and push. So the Native American concern becomes a concern again when we move in 1850 towards westward expansion. That we want to take lands west of the Mississippi and put railroads on those lands, and settlers are going to be moving west of the Mississippi for new opportunities, and all of a sudden these Indians are in our way again. Okay? Now the government's philosophy concerning lands west of the Mississippi is they wanted to, quote, conquer the land, gain control of the land so they could then put their railroads through. So who is the government going to enlist to conquer the land west of the Mississippi? The military. The United States Army is going to be who the government is going to depend on to conquer the land in the west and get these Native Americans or Indians out of our hair so we can build the railroads and we can expand westward. Okay? Now, the American military had a two-part philosophy for the future of Native Americans. This was their thought on Native Americans. So when the Army takes off to do their job here to conquer the land, they have a two-part philosophy on the future of Native Americans. We're either going to contain them, which means do what? Put them on reservations, or if they don't want to go, we're going to exterminate them. So the two-part philosophy of the United States Army during this time of Native Americans in the West is we will either contain them or we will exterminate them. Now, it's kind of interesting, we're off task a little bit. I think most of you know a little bit about the little Battle of the Little Bighorn where General Custer went there and got his men annihilated by thousands of Native Americans, Plains Indians. And a lot of people think he was going there looking for a fight. He really wasn't going there looking for a fight. His goal was to get there and force those Indians onto reservations or contain them. What he didn't know is there were so many that had accumulated in that area, and he didn't know that they weren't willing to move. And as a result of that, he got himself in a bad situation and was totally wiped out. So his idea was to contain them. Custer wasn't an Indian hater. Matter of fact, he advocated for them on many occasions. I'll just give you an example. But his job was to contain them. And that's what his plan was at Little Bighorn. Unfortunately, the one that got exterminated was not them, ended up being him. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But that was the Native American concern, is that all of a sudden, they're in our way again. Okay? Now, before we get into the Plains Indian Campaign of 1876 and the conflicts between the military and Indians, I think you need to know a little bit about Plains Indians to understand their culture and that type of thing, and from their perspective a little bit. So we're going to talk about the Plains Indian way of life. What made up the Plains Indian way of life? What type of people were they? What were they interested in? What were the roles of a Native American or Indian male? Okay, those types of things. So we'll start with the Plains Indians' way of life. And their way of life consisted of three important basic needs. There were three things that Indians needed to live, their way of life. Anybody know what any of those three might be?
Buffalo.
Buffalo, absolutely, was the center of their life. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But buffalo was one of the three basic needs of the Plains Indians. What was another need that they had to have to survive? They could control this. This is the only thing they can control of the three. You might have this need on Sundays if you're of this nature. Their religion, okay? Their religion. That was a way of life, their religion. And of the three I'm going to talk about, that's the only one they have any control over. They can't control the buffalo. They can control religion. What's the other thing they need to be able to do to have their way of life successful? They need freedom. Freedom of movement. Freedom of movement. So the three things that make up the Plains Indian way of life were buffalo, freedom of movement, and religion. Now, Plains Indians led a migratory lifestyle. In other words, they were known as nomadic people. What does that mean? You move from place to place. And they moved in the direction of what? The buffalo. Very good. So that's the freedom I'm talking about. Indians led a migratory lifestyle. They were nomadic people. They moved from place to place according to the movement of the buffalo. Their villages were very portable. They moved 3 or 4 times a year according to the direction of the buffalo. That was their life. So they have to have buffalo, they have to have freedom of movement and religion. The only thing they control of those 3 is religion. Okay? And they're very nomadic people. Their villages are just portable. They can take them down and put them up in a moment's notice and be on the road, so to speak. Okay? Now these buffalo hunts, and the reason they moved in the direction of the buffalo is these buffalo hunts provided the Plains Indian with almost all of its food supply. That doesn't mean they didn't eat deer, they didn't eat other wild game, but buffalo was the biggest part of their food supply. And they not only used the buffalo for food, they used the hides for different things, including clothing. They used the bones, they used the intestines, they used almost every part of a buffalo. Very little ever went to waste. So in a buffalo hunt, if a buffalo was killed, virtually everything except for maybe the blood and fluids inside the animal were going to be used somehow, in some way by the tribe. And again, jumping ahead, that's why there was so much conflict between Plains Indians and buffalo hunters when they came west, looking only to kill buffalo for their hides. And they would leave the animals, on the plains wasted, and it caused tremendous conflict between whites and Indians. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, any questions on the Indians' way of life? Okay, let's talk about the role of a Plains Indian male. Now ladies, I'm not being mean to you, but the role of a woman in the Plains Indian tribe was basically to take care of the man, right? Take care of the children, okay? Those types of things, that was their role. But the role of the Plains Indian male was a lot different, okay? They basically had 2 responsibilities to their people. If you were a Plains Indian male, you had 2 responsibilities to your tribe. The first responsibility was that of a provider or hunter. So your first responsibility was that of a provider or a hunter. And the second role of a Plains Indian male was that of a protector or a warrior. So every Plains Indian male had 2 major responsibilities, that of a provider or a hunter, and that of a protector or a warrior. Now, Carter, on 100% of your time being a Plains Indian male, what percent do you think they spent being a protector or warrior? What would you guess? Of 100% of their time.
10%.
Now that's good. That's really good because most people think they spend all their time. Wyatt Wyman in the other class said not much of their percent. You said 10. They actually spent 20% of their time as a protector or a warrior and 80% of their time as a provider or hunter. Most kids think that they're on the warpath all the time. That wasn't true. So they spent 80% of their time providing for their people as a hunter and 20% of their time protecting their people as a warrior. Now it's an interesting training process because young males stayed with their mothers and grandmothers until they were 5. Once they turned 5, they began their training in that role of hunter or warrior at the age of 5. And at the age of 15, after approximately 10 years of training, at 15, these young males were very proficient in the roles of a provider and very proficient in the roles of a protector. So during that 10 years of training, they turned from a child to a warrior, brave, protector, provider. So let's even get this a little farther down and talk about specifics on their role as a provider or a hunter. We'll tell you some statistics about that. Okay? What they used to hunt with? before they had rifles?
Bows.
Bows and arrows and spears. What was the bow made of? Anybody know what the bow was generally made of? What type of wood? What type? Would you want a soft?
Soft.
Actually, hard. Okay, the bow was made out of hard. Okay, oak was the main wood that the bow was made of. And it was shaped, the bow was shaped in the shape of what the Indians referred to as the new moon. You ever seen a full moon? You ever seen a partial moon? Well, when you don't see, only see this much of the moon, it's called a new moon. And so Indians shaped their bow in the shape of a new moon. So the bows are made out of oak, usually, a substance that would be hard. How about the arrows? What type of wood were arrows made out of? What type of a tree? Anyone want to guess what arrows are made out of? Willow. Arrows are made out of willow. And the hunter arrow was designed with 3 feathers. Anybody know why? Any bow hunters in here? Go ahead.
Gives it a good aerodynamics. Or
Well, you can shoot it with 2. What's the key to 3? No? If you're a bow hunter, if you look at your arrows, you have 2 the same color and 1 that's a different color. And that different color arrow is put into your bow, into your draw, in a certain place because it's a guide arrow used for guiding the arrow or accuracy. Okay? So, the provider or hunter arrow is made of willow and contained 3 feathers, including one of the feathers is a guide feather for aiming. You want to be accurate when you're hunting, right? You want to be able to aim it. So keep that in mind. Now, these arrows were also marked or colored. Why? Why did a warrior or a hunter mark or color his arrows? To see it, to make sure they know they're his arrows. In a hunting situation, to see who actually killed the animal, right? Because that was kind of a big deal for their family. Although buffalo, for example, couldn't often be killed by 1 arrow normally. And normally when they went on a buffalo hunt, the animal was covered with many arrows. And so they simply split up the goodies from that. But they colored their arrows or marked them to determine which hunter killed which animal. What were the arrow heads made out of originally? What? Which is what? Well, rock. Okay, stone. Could have been different types, but we'll just say stone. But they transformed into metal later. But they were stone. We talk about arrowheads, finding arrowheads. Well, you can find arrowheads that aren't necessarily stone. You can find made out of metal. Where in the world would these Indians get metal specifically to make arrowheads?
show you with
Well, maybe, but not before friendly times. When these settlers are coming west in their wagons, how are they hauling their stuff in their wagons? What are they putting them into? Crates or what else? Especially like whiskey. Barrels. You ever seen an old whiskey barrel? Your parents probably have them cut in half to put flowers in. What holds a barrel together? The metal barrel hoop, right? And that's what they made. They were premium. If they could get a hold of metal barrel hoops, they would make arrowheads from the metal. Okay, so that was kind of premium stuff. Okay, so the arrow points or heads were originally stone, but later transgressed into metal from barrel hoops. How long was an arrow? Varied. If I'm a hunter provider, male Plains Indian, my arrow would be from my elbow, the tip of my longest finger, plus a hand. That's how long they were. Elbow, tip of finger, plus a hand. So my arrows would be that long, whereas somebody else's that had shorter arms would be different. That's how they measured their arrows, so that they had the correct draw. Elbow, tip of the finger, plus a hand. Kind of unique how the technology of that, isn't it? Now, let me ask you this. Which one of these is horizontal and which one is vertical? What's this one? Okay. The arrow heads were set in these arrows for a hunter vertically. Why? Why were they set in vertically? So when they spun and hit, they would hit like this instead of like this. Now the other class got this, I was pretty surprised. Why would they set that in there purposely, vertically, to use as a hunting arrow instead of like this? In other words, why would they want it to strike like this instead of like this? What? Well, kind of.
Something about if it hit, like the ribs, it'd go through.
No way! How is an animal's ribs? They're hunched over when they're on all fours.
It's like,
Vertical. So they wanted the arrowhead to go between the ribs. Very good. Between the ribs. So a hunter's arrow tip was set in the arrow vertically, so it would penetrate the animal between the ribs. Very good, Dan. What would they use to hunt with other than bow and arrow? Spears. And the hunting spear was different than the warrior spear. Okay, the hunter spear was going to be bigger, maybe a bigger stone on the front, sharp stone, or because it wanted to penetrate and bleed out. So it would be more of a, not a javelin type spear, but more of a digging type spear. Okay. All right. Now, these hunters had different strategies, just like you do when you go hunting. I'm going to give you 4 different strategies that these hunters use to kill buffalo. Anybody in here a bow hunter? Nobody in here. Huh? Well, what do most bow hunters do when they go bow hunting? They just jump in their pickup with their jeans and khaki shirt on and take, what do?
camouflage.
Yes, and Native Americans did that as well. They camouflaged themselves. Not necessarily like we do today, because they didn't have that type of clothing, but they would put on what they considered disguises, such as the camouflage philosophy that we use today, depending on the surroundings of the hunt. Okay? So they use the same philosophy of camouflaging themselves, or disguising themselves, just as we do today. What about in the winter? Did you know that they used to purposely push, when they were up, before horses came about, they would purposely push these buffalo into deep snow. Why would they do that? Get them bogged down for an easy kill. How did they keep from getting bogged down? What did they wear? Snowshoes, kind of the first primitive snowshoes. So there was another strategy, or another way that they hunted buffalo, is they would drive these buffalo into deep snow and get them bogged down for an easy kill. And to keep themselves from getting bogged down, what did they do? They built primitive snowshoes. They did this by foot, and after they got horses. What was the easy way if you didn't have a lot of time to kill a bunch of buffalo? You had to get them killed. What's that? Run them over buffalo jumps. Isn't there one at Chugwater? Kind of a famous buffalo jump at Chugwater around here, where they used to just on foot or on horses would run these buffalo right off a cliff. Now that wasn't something they were into too much, because that caused sometimes damage on the buffalo, on bones, etc., that they may have been able to use for something else. So that wasn't a common thing. If they could hunt them, they would, but if they needed them, they would run them off cliffs. Now, once Indians got, number 4, once Indians got introduced to horses, the kills were easier, because they would, and you'll see, I'm going to show you, we're going to watch the movie Dances with Wolves, because I just think it's worth seeing. I think it's the best Native American movie I see that somewhat gives you the feel. But anyway, they ran these animals, and ran them before they shot them, to do what? Well, tire them out, but get the blood pumping. Because when you shoot someone whose blood is pumping, they're going to bleed out quicker. And that was the idea too. They didn't have to wait as long for the animal to die. So they would run them, because you know, if you shoot a buffalo with a bow and arrow, it might take a while. But if he's pumped up and you hit him in the right spot and that animal bleeds out, it's easy. So they even took to that strategy as well as running the buffalo prior to shooting them. Okay, so that's kind of the role of the Native American or Indian male provider or hunter. Now let's talk about their role as a protector or warrior, some of the differences on equipment, etc. Do you think the bow is going to be any different if you're a warrior or a hunter? No, same thing, made out of oak, same type thing. How about the arrows? Are they going to be different? They're still going to be made of willow, but they're only going to have 2 feathers instead of 3. Now why would that be? What was the purpose of the 3rd feather in the hunter? Accuracy. Do you think they want to be accurate in battle? What they want to do is they want the shotgun effect. They want to fire off as many arrows as they can in the general direction of the enemy. So when you take 2 feathers, you don't have the accuracy, but you have much more speed to the arrow. And it's a matter of rapid fire in an area, not necessarily a specific. Because if you're fighting, you shoot into the group. Remember, like you talk about the Revolutionary War where they fired volleys into the group. Same thing with the arrow. So the warrior arrow only had 2 feathers, did not have a guide feather, because they wanted more speed rather than accuracy. The arrow points or heads were the same. They were originally stone and later transgressed into metal, but they weren't any different. The arrow length was exactly the same, elbow to the tip of the finger plus a hand. But what was different in the way the arrow head was set in the arrow? Horizontal, because if my ribs go like this, or if my ribs go like this, they go like this. So you want the horizontal to go in first. Okay? So that was the difference in the arrow, is that the arrowheads were set in horizontally to penetrate the enemy between the ribs. Now, the average Plains Indian warrior that went into battle would usually equip himself with a bow, approximately 100 arrows, a bison hide shield, and a spear, which would have been more like maybe the javelin action. You know, faster, not as big. So the average Plains Indian warrior would be equipped with a bow, about 100 arrows, a bison hide shield, and a long spear. How would you make a